The night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel loud. I'm talking about the creak of a porch board, the distant bark of a dog, even the wind moving through dry grass. So when someone knocked on the rancher's door, it didn't feel normal. He didn't rush to open it. Out here, you learn that fast hands can get you hurt. He took a second, listened. Another knock came, not angry, not weak either, just urgent. When he finally opened the door, he didn't see a drunk or a traveler needing water. He saw her, the sheriff's wife. And I swear, if you grew up in a town like this, you already know what that means. She's not supposed to be standing here. Not at night, not alone, not on a rancher's porch. She stood stiff, like she had practiced being brave on the walk over. Her hair was neat, but her face wasn't. Her eyes looked swollen, like she'd been fighting tears for hours and losing. The rancher didn't invite her in yet. He just watched her, confused, careful, like one wrong word could blow up his life. She swallowed once, then again, like the words were stuck in her throat, and then she said it. "I want a child from you." For a second I felt like the air itself stopped moving, because that isn't a request. Not here, not from her, not to him. The rancher's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hand stayed on the door, half ready to close it, half ready to pull her inside before anyone saw. And the way she looked at him next, it wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a game. It was desperation. He didn't move her inside right away. That's the part that shocked me, because most men would panic, or they'd get bold. But this rancher just stood there like his mind was trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. And she stayed on the porch, in the open, like she didn't care who might pass by. That alone told me something was wrong. This town wasn't big. It was one of those places where people can tell what you had for breakfast just by looking at your face. A place where windows had curtains but ears didn't need them. You could sneeze on one street and someone would say "bless you" from the next. So the sheriff's wife coming to a rancher's home at night, that wasn't just scandal. That was danger. The rancher finally lowered his voice. "You shouldn't be here." Not "hello," not "are you all right," just that, because he knew the sheriff. Everybody knew the sheriff. The sheriff wasn't just a man with a badge. He was the kind of man who made the badge feel heavier. He walked like the ground owed him respect. He smiled like it was a warning. And when he looked at you, it felt less like being seen and more like being measured. Even the rancher, a grown man who worked sunup to sundown, had learned to keep things simple around him. Pay your dues. Don't raise your voice. Don't joke too much. Don't look too long. And the sheriff's wife, she was supposed to be the calm shadow beside all that power. The town called her proper. The kind of woman who stood straight in church and never missed a hymn. The kind of woman who spoke politely even when she didn't mean it. The kind of woman who wore her pain like perfume, so no one would ask questions. Now she was here, standing under the rancher's lantern light, asking for something that could get him killed. The rancher scanned the road behind her. No horse, no wagon, no footprints he could see clearly in the dark, but he didn't like any of it. He could almost hear the town already. He could almost hear the whispers crawling out of the ground. "How did you get here?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes flicked toward the fence line like she thought someone might rise out of the shadows. Then she looked back at him and her face tightened, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of stubbornness. The kind you only see when someone has already decided they're done being scared. "I walked," she said. That made my stomach drop a little, because walking that far at night means you either had no other choice or you didn't care what happened to you anymore. The rancher's voice went even lower. "People might have seen you. I stayed off the main road. Still." She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but it didn't sound happy. "Do you think I don't know how this town works?" And that was the first time she sounded like a real person to me, not the sheriff's wife, not the town's idea of her, just her. The rancher didn't step aside yet. He kept his body in the doorway like a barrier, like a warning, but he also didn't shut the door. And that's a strange in-between to stand in, half refusal, half mercy. "You need to go home," he said. "Right now." She stared at him. "And do what? Sit quiet, smile and pretend," he frowned. If the sheriff, I know, she cut in, and her voice didn't rise but it sharpened. I know what he'll do. That line hung there because that wasn't gossip, that wasn't a guess. That sounded like experience. The rancher's jaw tightened. He looked older suddenly, like someone had added years to his face in just 1 minute. "This ain't my business," he said, but it didn't sound convincing. It sounded like a man trying to keep a fence up while a storm is already pushing it down. She nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer, like she had rehearsed for it. Then she did something that felt bold and reckless at the same time. She took a step closer, not touching him, not flirting, just closing the distance enough that the lantern light showed everything clearly. The tiredness under her eyes, the tight grip she had on her own hands, the way she was holding herself together like a cracked cup. "I didn't come for comfort," she said. "I came because you're different." The rancher blinked once. "Different how?" She hesitated. And for a second I thought she might leave, like she'd realize how crazy this was and run back into the night. But she didn't. "In this town," she said quietly, "men look at me like I'm part of him, like I'm his property. Like the badge stamped my name too." The rancher's fingers flexed on the edge of the door. He looked away just briefly, like he didn't want to admit he understood. "And you?" he asked. She swallowed again. "You don't look at me like that." He didn't deny it. He also didn't accept it. He just stood there, caught between what was right and what was safe. And listen, that's the real problem in places like this. Sometimes right and safe are enemies. The rancher finally stepped back a few inches, enough room for her to pass if she chose. But she didn't rush inside. She waited like she wanted his permission, not just his space. He glanced toward the road again. "If someone sees—" "They won't," she said, but the way she said it felt like hope, not certainty. His voice turned rough. "You're playing with fire." "I've been living in it," she answered. That hit hard. Because it explains everything without explaining anything. It tells you she's been burning for a long time. And tonight, she just couldn't hide the smoke anymore. The rancher rubbed a hand over his face. I could almost see him doing the math in his head. If he lets her in, he's risking his life. If he sends her away, he might be sending her back to something worse. If he asks questions, he's stepping into a world that belongs to the sheriff, and people don't do that unless they want trouble. And that's when I started thinking about the rancher himself. Men like him don't usually live alone for no reason. They don't usually stay quiet for no reason either. Quiet can be a habit, or it can be a scar. He had a decent ranch from what folks said. Not the biggest, not the poorest. Enough land to keep him busy, enough cattle to keep him breathing. He paid his taxes. He didn't cause fights. He didn't gamble in the loud saloon. He wasn't looking to be anyone's hero. But here was this woman dragging him toward a cliff with one sentence. She watched him struggle, and she didn't rush him. That's another thing I noticed. She wasn't trying to charm him. She wasn't teasing. She looked like someone who had already decided to stop asking life for permission. "I shouldn't have come," she said softly, but she still didn't step away. "But I don't have anyone else." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "You got the whole town." She shook her head. "The town belongs to him." The rancher's throat moved like he wanted to say something and couldn't find the words. And then she did the one thing that made this even more dangerous. She said his name, not sir, not mister. His name like she'd been holding it in her mouth for days. He stiffened immediately, like the name itself was a rope around his neck. "You've been asking about me," he said. "Yes." "Why?" She took a slow breath, and for the first time her voice softened into something almost tender. "Almost. Because people talk," she said, "and sometimes they tell the truth by accident." The rancher stared at her. "What truth?" She paused, just long enough to make my skin crawl. Then she said, "They said you're a man who can keep a secret." And the rancher's eyes flicked toward the darkness again, like the darkness was listening. Because if she was right, that meant he had kept secrets before. And if she was wrong, he was about to learn how expensive one secret could be. The rancher didn't answer right away. He just stared at her like she had placed a rattlesnake on his doorstep and asked him to hold it. "A secret," he repeated, slow. "That's what you came for." She nodded once. He breathed out through his nose. You don't understand. In this county, a secret don't stay a secret. It turns into a story. Then the story turns into a rope. Her eyes didn't drop. I know. That alone made him hesitate, because she wasn't naive. She wasn't excited. She wasn't acting like this was some wild romance. She looked tired, like she had already cried all the tears she had, and now she was standing on whatever was left. He opened the door wider finally, not as an invitation, more like surrender. She stepped inside fast, like the cold night behind her was full of eyes. The rancher shut the door and slid the bolt with a click that sounded too loud for such a small room. They stood there for a moment, facing each other in the dim light. No music, no sweet talk, just two people trapped in a moment neither of them had planned for. His cabin was plain, a table, two chairs, a wash basin, a bed pushed into the corner. The kind of place where a man comes to rest, not to entertain. She looked around like she was taking comfort in how simple it was. Simple meant safe. At least, safer than the sheriff's house, where every wall probably felt like it had ears. The rancher kept his back near the door. His arms stayed close to his sides, like he didn't want even his body to make a wrong move. "Say it again," he said. She blinked. "What? What you asked me?" Her lips parted, then closed. She swallowed. The words didn't come easy the second time. That told me the first time wasn't for drama, it was desperation. "I want a child," she said quietly. "From me." She nodded again, and the room felt smaller. He stared at the floor for a second, then back at her. "Why me?" Her eyes shifted, just for a heartbeat, and that tiny movement made me lean in. "Because people look away when they're choosing what to reveal." "Because I can't have one with him," she said. The rancher didn't react with surprise, not fully. More like he had already guessed something like that. He tightened his jaw. "Is that what he told you?" She hesitated. "He doesn't talk about it. So you don't know." "I know," she said, firmer now. "I know because every month I pray, and every month nothing happens, and every month he looks at me like it's my fault." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "He blames you." Her voice got smaller. Not with words, with silence, with that look. She took a step toward the table and placed her hands on the wood like she needed it to keep steady. "In public, he smiles," she said. "He calls me his good wife. He lets the town think we're blessed." The rancher didn't speak. "In private," she continued, "he treats me like a problem he can't solve, like a thing that failed him." The rancher's face hardened. "And you want to fix it." Her fingers gripped the table edge. "I want to live." He blinked at that like the meaning hit him late. She lifted her eyes to him. "You think this is about wanting a baby because I'm bored?" she asked. "It's not. It's not like that." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. "That's how you know someone has been holding it in too long. If I don't give him a child," she said, "I don't know what he'll do." The rancher's throat moved. "He'd hurt you." She didn't answer yes. She didn't answer no. She just said, "He gets colder every day." And I swear that was scarier than a shout, because coldness is patient. Coldness waits. The rancher took a slow step forward, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to hear her breathing. "You came here," he said, "because you think if you bring him a baby, he'll change." She shook her head. "Maybe he won't. But it will give me time. It will give me a place in that house that can't be questioned." He looked confused. "You already have a place. You're his wife." Her laugh was bitter. "Wives can be replaced. A mother of his child. That's different." That line hit like a truth nobody wanted to say out loud. The rancher paced once, tight circles across the floor, like the cabin wasn't big enough for his thoughts. "So what?" he said. "You want me to, and then you go home like nothing happened?" "Yes. And if you're with child," she nodded and her face went pale, "then I'll say it's his." The rancher stopped moving. It looked like his body wanted to walk away but couldn't find the door. "That's what you're asking me to do," he said, voice rough. "To put my blood under another man's name." Her eyes didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to help me survive." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as the sheriff's wife, but as a person. He worked his jaw like he was chewing on anger, maybe at her, maybe at the sheriff, maybe at the whole unfair world. "You know what happens if he finds out," he said. "I know. He won't take you to court. he added. "He won't ask questions in town. He'll come out here with a shotgun and a few friends, and that'll be the end of it." "I know," she repeated, and her voice broke a little. "That's why I came to you, because you're the only man I've ever seen look at him without bending." The rancher's eyes sharpened. "People told you that." "I saw it," she said. "At the feed store last spring, he tried to talk down to you. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't smile. You just stayed solid." The rancher went still, and that's when I realized something. The sheriff and the rancher had history, maybe not a big public history, but enough that she noticed. He turned his head slightly like he was listening for something outside. Then he looked back at her. "You shouldn't have watched me. You shouldn't have remembered me." She lifted her chin. "I remember anything that looks like a way out." The rancher's eyes softened for 1 second. Not kindness, more like understanding. Then it snapped back to caution. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside just a finger's width, peering into the dark. Nothing out there, just the shape of the night. "You got to understand," he said without turning around. "I'm not a fool. If you walked here, someone could have followed, could be a deputy, could be the sheriff himself." "I wasn't followed," she said quickly. "I checked." He turned back, and the look in his eyes made her fall quiet. "How do you check?" he asked. She hesitated. "I waited, I listened. I went the long way." He nodded slowly, but he didn't look convinced. "You ever been out alone at night before?" Her lips pressed tight. "Not like this." "That's what scares me," he said, "because you're brave right now. But brave people make mistakes when they're scared." She stepped away from the table and took something from her coat pocket, a small cloth bundle. She held it out like an offering. The rancher didn't take it. "What's that?" he asked. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a ring, not a wedding band, something older, simple, worn smooth. "I brought this," she said. "If you say no, I won't come back. I'll leave you alone. But if you say yes, I want you to take it." He frowned. "Why?" "So I know you won't tell anyone," she said, "and so you know I'm serious." He stared at the ring, then at her. "A ring won't stop a bullet." "It's not for bullets," she whispered. "It's for trust." The rancher let out a low breath. His eyes looked tired now too, like he'd been fighting his own life in silence for years, and she had just dragged it into the open. He finally moved closer, still not touching her, just close enough that the lantern light caught the wet shine in her eyes. "And what about you?" he asked. "What are you willing to lose?" Her voice came out steady but small. "Everything," she said. "I already am." Then she added, almost like she couldn't stop it, "Please." And that single word changed the whole room, because it wasn't the sheriff's wife speaking anymore. It was a woman who had run out of options. The rancher didn't answer her pleas. Not with a yes, not with a no. He just stood there, staring at the ring like it was evidence from a crime that hadn't happened yet. He reached out slowly, then stopped, hand hovering in the air. You could tell he hated himself for even considering it. "Put that away," he said. Her fingers tightened around the ring. "So, you're saying no?" "I'm saying this is madness," he replied, and his voice stayed low, but it carried weight. "You come into a man's home at night and ask him to ruin his life. You don't even know what you're asking." "I do know," she said quickly. "I know the risk." "No," he snapped, sharper than before, then caught himself. He took a breath. "You know the risk for me. You don't know what it does to a person after." She looked at him, confused. "After what?" "After you live with it," he said. "After you wake up every morning wondering if today's the day the sheriff rides up here with a posse and buries you behind your own barn." Her face went pale at that, but she didn't back away. She swallowed and tried to steady her voice. "I wouldn't let that happen." He gave a hard little laugh. "You wouldn't let it happen. You know how that sounds." She flinched just a little, not from insult, from truth. The rancher walked past her and set an old kettle on the stove, more out of habit than need. His hands moved like he needed something normal to do, something that didn't feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. "You should go," he said again, softer this time, "before you make it worse." She didn't move. He turned. "Did you hear me?" "I did," she replied. "I'm still here." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because if I leave without an answer," she said, "I won't sleep another night." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head like he wanted to shake the whole conversation loose. You want an answer? Fine, here's an answer. This isn't a romance story. I'm not the kind of man you think I am. I don't think you're a hero, she said. That made him pause. I think you're a man who understands what it feels like to be trapped, she continued. The rancher's jaw tightened again. You don't know anything about me. No, she admitted, but I can see it. He looked away like her words hit a place he didn't want touched. Then she stepped closer, careful, respectful, like approaching an injured animal. I'm not asking for love, she said. I'm asking for mercy. He stayed quiet. She tried another angle, and you could hear how desperate she was not to sound desperate. We can set rules, she said. Strict rules, no talking in town, no meeting in daylight, no letters. Nothing that leaves a trail. The rancher leaned against the wall, arms crossing, eyes hard. Rules don't stop people from noticing. I'll be careful, she insisted. You're already not being careful, he replied. You came here. Her lips pressed together. That one stung because it was true. He took a step toward the window again, pulling the curtain just a pinch. The knight stared back. No movement, but he didn't relax. You want to know what happens in small towns, he said. People don't need proof. They don't need facts. They need something to chew on. She nodded faintly, like she couldn't deny it. And you, he added, you're the sheriff's wife. You sneeze wrong and half the town hears it. She sighed, tired. Then tell me what you want me to do. He looked at her, really looked. Go home, he said. And if home isn't safe, she asked. The rancher froze. For a second the cabin felt colder. Even the kettle on the stove seemed to stop being normal, because that question wasn't a metaphor. It was a crack in the wall, showing what might be behind it. The rancher's voice dropped. Has he hurt you? Her eyes shifted, just for a second, and that tiny shift spoke louder than any confession. He gets angry, she said carefully, and when he gets angry he wants control. The rancher's fists clenched at his sides. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can say, she whispered. The rancher's face tightened like he was holding back something hot and violent. He took a slow breath and forced himself to speak calmly. Listen, he said. If you're in danger, we handle that the right way. She almost laughed. The right way, he frowned. We go to the judge or the marshal from the next county, and who brings the papers to my door, she cut in. Who carries the message? Who enforces it? The rancher didn't answer, because everyone knew the answer, the sheriff. She stepped back and spread her hands like she was showing him the empty space around her. There is no right way, she said. Not for me. He stared at her, and a new kind of anger rose in his eyes, not at her, at the world, at the system, at the way power works when it's wearing a badge. The rancher turned away, jaw tight, pacing again. Why me? He muttered, almost to himself. Why walk into my life with this? She spoke quietly behind him. Because you're not tied to him, you're not his deputy, you're not his drinking friend, you don't owe him loyalty. The rancher stopped pacing. Everybody owes him something. Not you, she said. You don't fear him the way they do. The rancher slowly turned. His eyes were sharp now. You think I don't fear him, her face softened. I think you do. I think you just don't show it. He held her gaze, and for a moment it felt like both of them were standing on opposite sides of the same wound. Then he asked, What's the real reason you want a child? Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her hands. The rancher didn't press her with shouting. He just waited, and that quiet waiting was its own kind of pressure. Finally, she spoke. Because a child is protection, she said. In that house. In that town. He nodded slowly. Protection from him. She didn't deny it. The rancher's voice turned rough. You know what you're asking me to do is wrong. I know, she said softly. But so is what he's doing. That was the first time she sounded angry. The rancher's eyes flicked to the ring again. And if I say yes, he asked, what happens to me when it's done? I just stay here and pretend I didn't help you. She stepped closer again, and this time she looked him straight in the face. I won't pretend you didn't help me, she said. I'll remember, always. He shook his head. Memory don't keep a man alive. No, she admitted, but it keeps him from turning bitter. That line hit him like a slap because you could see the bitterness already sitting on his shoulders, like dust that never fully washes off. The kettle began to hiss faintly, a thin sound in the silence. The rancher stared at the stove like it might give him an answer. Then he reached for a cup and poured water he didn't even need. His hands trembled just slightly, and that was the moment I realized how close he was to a decision. He looked back at her. "If I even consider this," he said, "you follow my rules, not yours." "Mine?" Her eyes widened a little like she didn't expect him to say that. "What rules?" she asked. His voice stayed quiet but firm. "First rule, you never come here again like this." She nodded quickly. "Second," he continued, "you don't tell anyone, not your friends, not the preacher, not even a sister if you got one. Nobody." Her mouth tightened. "Nobody," she repeated. "Third," he said, "if I think you're being watched even once, it ends." She swallowed. "Okay." He watched her carefully, like he was trying to see if she could actually do it. Then he added a fourth rule, and his eyes hardened. "And if the sheriff ever asks you directly," he said, "you don't protect me with a lie that sounds too perfect. You act like you're offended. You act like you're shocked. You act like the idea never crossed your mind." She nodded, but her face looked terrified now, because she understood what that meant. He wasn't planning for romance. He was planning for war. The next few days felt normal on the surface. That's what made it scary. The sun rose like it always did. Men rode into town for feed and nails. Women carried baskets and talked about prices like the world wasn't balancing on secrets. But once you know a secret is there, you start seeing it everywhere. The rancher went into town twice that week, and both times he felt eyes on him. Not because he had done anything obvious, just because small towns don't need a reason. They only need a pattern, a scratch in the story, a moment that doesn't fit. He kept his hat low. He bought what he needed. He didn't linger. He didn't drink. He didn't joke with the other ranch hands outside the saloon. He acted like a man with nothing to hide. And that's the first mistake people make. When you try too hard to look innocent, you start looking guilty. He told himself he was imagining things. He told himself the sheriff's wife had gone home and would never come back. He told himself that night was just a desperate misunderstanding, and he could wash it away like mud. Then he saw her. Not close. Not obvious. Just across the street, stepping out of the general store with a small sack of flour held tight against her chest. She didn't look at him. That was the rule, and she followed it. But he felt her presence like heat. Her posture was straight, proper, perfect. If anyone watched her, they'd see the sheriff's wife doing ordinary errands. Nothing more. Yet the rancher noticed a tiny thing. A slight tremble in her hand as she adjusted her grip. A pause before she stepped down from the porch. Like her body remembered danger even when her face refused to show it. He forced himself to keep walking, but he could feel people watching anyway. By the time he reached the hitching post, he heard two women behind him, voices low and sweet, like sugar hiding dirt. "Did you see her lately?" "I did." "She looks different. Maybe she's just tired." "Tired from what?" Soft laughter, the kind that isn't funny. The rancher's stomach tightened. He didn't turn, he didn't react. He climbed into his saddle and rode out like he hadn't heard a thing. But the words stuck to him. She looks different. If the town noticed, the sheriff would notice too. That night, the rancher didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin made him sit up. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. He kept thinking of that fourth rule. If the sheriff ever asks directly, she must act shocked, offended, like the idea is poison. Because the sheriff wasn't the type to accuse without testing first. He liked to circle. He liked to watch how people breathed. A few mornings later, the sheriff came to the ranch, not with deputies, not with a posse, alone. That's how confident he was. When a man rides onto your land alone, it's either because he trusts you or because he doesn't think you can touch him. The rancher stepped out onto his porch, calm on the outside, ice in his veins. He wiped his hands on a rag he didn't need and watched the sheriff tie off his horse like he owned the place. The sheriff smiled, friendly as a snake. "Morning," he said. "Heard you're selling 2 head next month." The rancher nodded. Maybe. That's so, the sheriff said, still smiling. He looked around at the fence, the trough, the barn, the way a hawk looks around a field. Then his eyes landed back on the rancher. You seem busy lately. The rancher kept his face still. It's a ranch. The sheriff chuckled as if that was funny, then leaned a little closer. Town's been quiet, he said. Too quiet. Makes a man wonder what people are doing with all that quiet. The rancher didn't answer. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the cabin door. You been getting visitors? The rancher's chest tightened, but his voice stayed plain. No, the sheriff hummed like he was tasting the answer. Not swallowing it, just tasting. Funny, he said, still casual, because folks say they saw tracks off the main road, near your place. The rancher shrugged lightly. Animals make tracks. The sheriff smiled wider. Sure do. He stood there a moment, letting the silence stretch. The sheriff loved silence. Silence makes people fill the space with mistakes. Then he patted the rancher's shoulder like they were friends. Well, he said, if you do get visitors, you make sure they're the right kind. The rancher met his eyes. Always, the sheriff nodded slowly. Good. And just like that he turned and rode away. No threats, no shouting, just a soft warning wrapped in politeness. But the rancher knew what it was, a test, and the sheriff would run more tests. The next time the rancher went into town, he noticed something worse. A deputy standing beside the water trough, not drinking, just watching. Another man leaning outside the saloon, not smoking, just waiting. It wasn't open surveillance. It was a net slowly lowering. The rancher bought his supplies and kept his eyes forward. On the way out he heard his name, not shouted, tossed. Hey, a voice called. You hear the sheriff's looking for a new hand. Someone to help with personal errands. People laughed. The rancher didn't. That joke wasn't random. It was the town trying to sniff something out, hoping he'd react, hoping he'd blush, hoping he'd pick a fight. Anything that said he had a nerve exposed. He didn't give them anything. But inside he was burning. The sheriff's wife didn't come again. Not right away. That should have calmed him. Instead, it made him more nervous. Because if she wasn't coming, that meant either she had changed her mind or she couldn't. The thought hit him hard one evening when he saw a rider on the ridge. A woman's silhouette for just a second against the sunset, then gone. His heart kicked. He mounted his horse and rode a wide circle around his land, keeping to the trees, checking the low places where someone could hide. He found nothing. No tracks he could follow. No sign. But when he returned to the cabin, there was a small mark on his fence post. A scratch in the wood, fresh. Not an accident, not weather. A signal. His mouth went dry. He waited until night and he didn't light the lantern. Then came a knock. Soft, careful. 2 taps, a pause, then one more. Like a code they hadn't agreed on but somehow both understood. He opened the door just enough to see her face in the dark. She slipped in fast, breath shaking, then turned her back to the door, listening. The rancher slid the bolt again. What happened? He asked. Her eyes were wide. He's watching, she whispered. He's watching me. The rancher kept his voice low. Why do you think that? She swallowed. Because he asked me questions. The rancher's stomach dropped. Directly? Not directly, she said. He asked where I went last week. He asked why I've been walking more. He asked why I've been quiet. The rancher leaned closer. What did you say? I said I've been tired, she whispered. I said church has been heavy on my heart. I said I've been praying. The rancher didn't relax. And what did he do? Her voice cracked. He smiled. That terrified me more than anything else, because his smile meant he didn't believe her, or worse, he believed enough to stay patient. The rancher rubbed his face, thinking fast. You can't come here, he hissed. Not if he's watching. I know, she pleaded, but I had to tell you he's different now. He's gentle. The rancher's eyes narrowed. Gentle, she nodded, shaking. He's gentle the way a man is gentle when he's holding a knife behind his back. The rancher stared at her and the weight of it settled over the cabin like smoke. The sheriff wasn't hunting a rumor, he was hunting the truth, and he wasn't in a hurry. The rancher kept his voice low, but it came out hard. You can't keep coming here. I'm not trying to, she whispered. I'm trying to stay alive. He stared at her face in the dark, and for the first time he saw something new under the fear. Not just panic, calculation. Like she had been thinking 10 steps ahead all week and still couldn't find a safe path. "Tell me exactly what he asked," the rancher said. She took a shaky breath. "He asked if I've been feeling sick." The rancher's stomach tightened. "And I said no," she whispered. "Then he asked why I've been eating less." The rancher went still. "Have you?" She nodded barely. "I try, but some days the food won't stay." The rancher didn't blink. He just looked at her like the ground had shifted under both of them. "And then," she continued, voice thin, "he asked if I've been visiting anyone." The rancher's hands curled into fists at his sides. "That one was for you to hang yourself on." She nodded quickly, eyes shining. "I said no. I said I've been at home and at church and nowhere else." The rancher's jaw tightened, and he smiled. "Yes." He turned away, pacing once, then stopping like a man who realized pacing wouldn't save him. "He knows," he muttered. "Or he suspects enough to make it true." She stepped closer, careful. "What do we do?" The rancher looked at her, and there was no softness in his answer, only survival. "We stop," he said. "Tonight. This ends." Her face fell like he'd struck her. "You can't mean that." "I do," he said. "If he's fishing, you don't jump into the boat." Her lips trembled. "If we stop now, he'll still keep watching. And if he's already decided something, stopping won't save me." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "Save you from what?" She hesitated, then whispered, "From being sent away." The rancher blinked. "Sent away where?" She swallowed hard. "Back east," she said, "to his sister's place, where people don't ask questions, where I'll disappear and the town will forget I ever existed." The rancher didn't speak. He just stared. She rushed to explain, words tripping now. "He said it like a joke," she whispered. "He said, maybe I'll send you to my sister for a spell. Fresh air might fix your mood." But the way he said it, it wasn't a joke. The rancher exhaled slowly. "So he's clearing the board." Her eyes widened. "What?" "If he sends you away," the rancher said, "he controls the story. He can remarry. He can tell the town you were sickly, or unfit, or anything." Tears finally slipped out, quiet and helpless. She wiped them fast, like she was ashamed to lose control in front of him. "I don't want to become a story," she choked. The rancher's face hardened. "Then you can't make the story easy for him." She looked up at him like she didn't understand. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "You said the town belongs to him," he said. "Fine. Then we use the town." Her breathing hitched. "How?" The rancher's eyes flicked to the window. "If he wants to accuse you," he said, "he needs something that won't turn the town against him." Her brows pulled together. "The town won't turn against him." "They will if you play it right," the rancher said. "Not against him as sheriff, against him as a husband." She stared. "That's dangerous." "So is breathing," he replied. "Listen to me. If he asks again, you don't just act shocked. You get loud, not wild, not foolish, loud enough for someone to hear." She looked terrified. "If I shame him—" "You don't shame him," he cut in. "You shame the rumor. You act like the town is insulting you. You act like they're insulting him too." Her lips parted slightly, thoughts racing. The rancher continued steady. "You go to church. You sit where everyone sees you. You hold your head high. You smile at the ladies who whisper." She shook her head slightly. "He'll still watch." "Let him," the rancher said. "Because while he watches, he'll have to act like the sheriff. Calm, fair, controlled. He can't move like a monster in daylight." She stared at him, and I could feel how badly she wanted to believe it. He softened his voice just a little. "You ever see a man lose control in front of the whole town?" She whispered. "Yes." "What happens?" She swallowed. "People remember." "Exactly," he said. "He wants the story to serve him. We make sure it doesn't." For a long moment the cabin held only their breathing. Then she asked the question that made my skin prickle. "And what about you?" she whispered. "What happens if he comes for you?" The rancher's eyes went distant. "He won't come for me first," he said. "He'll try to make you point at me." Her face tightened. "I won't." The rancher shook his head. "You might not have a choice." She took a shaky step back. "What do you mean?" He stared at her like he hated what he was about to say. "He'll corner you," he said. "He'll be gentle. He'll sound kind. He'll offer forgiveness. He'll offer a way out. And then he'll ask one simple question. He paused. He'll ask, "Who is it?" Her breath caught. "I'll lie." The rancher's voice stayed flat. "He'll know." She looked at him, trembling. "Then what do I do?" The rancher hesitated, then spoke like a man cutting off his own hand. "You don't answer with a name," he said. "You answer with the town." She frowned through tears. "I don't understand." "You say, 'How dare you ask me that?'" the rancher told her. "You say, 'Do you think your own wife would shame you like that?' You make it about his pride. You make him defend his marriage in public, not investigate it in private." Her eyes widened slowly. "You want me to force him to act like a loving husband." The rancher gave a small, grim nod. "Because the moment he stops acting, he reveals himself." She stared at him, and I could see the fear battling hope inside her. Then there was a sound outside. A horse. Not the wind, not a branch. Hoofbeats slow and close, coming down the ranch path like the rider wasn't worried about being heard. Both of them froze. The rancher moved without thinking. He killed the lantern with a swift pinch. Darkness swallowed the room. The hoofbeats stopped. A pause, then another sound, leather creaking, a man shifting in a saddle, like someone sitting out there listening the way a wolf listens. The rancher leaned in close to her ear. "Don't breathe loud," he whispered. Her hand flew to her mouth. The door didn't open. No knock came, just silence. And somehow that silence was worse than anything. The rancher's mind was racing, and I could feel it. If it was the sheriff, he was confirming something. If it was a deputy, the sheriff had started using other hands. Either way, the net was tighter than ever. The rancher eased toward the window, moving like a shadow. He pulled the curtain back the smallest amount. Moonlight cut a thin line across his face. Then he stiffened. He turned back to her, eyes sharp even in the dark. Not a deputy, not the sheriff. A boy, a young rider, barely old enough to shave, sitting on a small horse and holding a folded piece of paper like it was a weapon. The rancher unbolted the door and stepped out just enough to keep his body blocking the inside. "What is it?" the rancher asked. The boy swallowed, eyes darting past him like he wanted to see who else was there. "Message," he said. "From the sheriff." The rancher's heart seemed to stop. "Read it." The boy shook his head fast. "He said, 'Hand it to you, only you.'" The rancher took the paper, fingers tight. The boy didn't wait. He kicked his horse and rode off. Like delivering that message burned his hands. The rancher stepped back inside and shut the door. He didn't light the lantern. He unfolded the paper in the dark, went to the window where moonlight could catch a few words. His face changed as he read. "What does it say?" she whispered. The rancher didn't answer right away. He just stared at the paper like it had teeth. Then slowly he read it out loud, voice barely above a breath. "Tomorrow," he said. "At sundown, I'd like a word, man to man, at my house." The sheriff wasn't accusing, he was inviting, and that was the most terrifying move of all.